The wind came in cold from the north that night, hard and fast, dragging dust and sleet across the prairie. It howled through the canyons and over the low hills like a living thing, hungry and wild. The lanterns at Jake Carson's ranch had burned out hours ago, and only the faint orange glow of lightning lit his path home. He leaned low in the saddle, his coat pulled tight, his arms cradling a bundle that squirmed and cried against his chest. The other bundle, smaller, lighter, was wrapped in the folds of his coat against his ribs. Every hoofbeat was a struggle through mud, every gust of wind threatened to knock him clean from the horse. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. The babies were crying harder now. Their tiny faces pressed into his shirt, wailing against the roar of the storm. "It's all right," he muttered, his voice breaking. "We're almost there, I promise." The promise sounded hollow even to his own ears. His house was still a mile off, and he could already see the flash of water spilling through the low gullies. The creeks had overrun their banks. The world had turned to chaos, black clouds tearing apart the stars, the air thick with dirt and thunder. He pressed his heels into the horse's sides. The old mare whinnied but obeyed, muscles straining beneath him. Every few moments, Jake reached down to tighten the blanket around the babies. He didn't dare look down for long. The road was treacherous, and if he fell, there'd be no one left to pick them up. When he finally saw the outline of his ranch house through the storm, he almost didn't believe it. The roof sagged, one shutter hung loose, and the fence posts had been snapped clean by wind. But it was home. It was all he had left. He stumbled off the horse before it stopped moving, clutching both babies to his chest. His boots sank deep into the mud as he half ran, half slid up the steps and kicked open the door. The sound of the hinges protesting echoed through the dark. Inside, it was cold, colder than the air outside, somehow. The fire had died while he was gone, and the hearth was nothing but gray ash. Jake set the babies down on the old quilt Emily had sewn years ago, then dropped to his knees in front of the fireplace. His hands shook as he struck a match, shielding it from the wind that slipped through every crack in the walls. The first match died. The second caught, sputtered, then went out with a hiss. Jake swore softly under his breath and tried again. On the third match, the kindling flared, licking up the bark until a weak flame began to grow. The light spread, warming the edges of the room just enough for him to see the faces of his children. Samuel had Emily's eyes, deep and steady, like a calm patch of river. Clara had her smile, small and soft, even when she cried. They were all that remained of her now. Jake sank down beside them, letting the exhaustion wash over him. His coat was soaked, his hair dripping into his eyes, his arms trembling from holding their weight for hours. He pressed his palms to the floor to steady himself and whispered, "You're safe now." The twins didn't stop crying. They were hungry, cold, confused, just like him. He reached for the bottle of milk he'd brought from town, but it was nearly empty, and the rest of the food was gone. Supplies had been running thin for weeks. He'd spent the last of his money on medicine and lamp oil. Everything else, the crops, the fences, the horses, was slipping away with the winter. Jake rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know how much more I can do, Em," he said quietly. His eyes went to the photograph above the mantel, Emily's photograph. Her face smiled down at him, frozen in a summer that felt like another lifetime. "I'm trying, but," his voice cracked. He bowed his head, and took a deep breath that came out shaky. When the fire caught stronger, the room filled with light, revealing the things he hadn't noticed at first, the leaks in the ceiling, the cracked windowpane, the damp spreading across the wooden floor. The place was falling apart, and he didn't have the strength or the means to fix it. He turned back to the babies, who were starting to quiet now, their eyes wide and glassy in the firelight. "It's just you and me," he murmured. "You and me against the whole damn world." Thunder rolled outside. The walls creaked. He rocked them both, one arm under each, his body moving with the rhythm of an old habit. Emily used to do it that way, standing by this same fire, humming under her breath. The memory hit him like a knife. "Don't you give up, Jake," she'd said to him once, her hand on his cheek. "If anything happens, you promise me you'll keep going. You promise." He'd made that promise. But tonight, it felt impossible to keep. The twins had drifted off to sleep by the time he heard it, a faint sound at first, almost drowned by the storm. A knock. 3 times, slow and deliberate. Jake froze. His first thought was bandits. The roads were full of desperate men these days, drifters looking for easy targets. He set the babies gently back on the quilt, reached for his rifle by the door, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The wind howled again, rattling the windows. He tightened his grip on the gun. Then came the voice, soft, almost trembling, but unmistakably human. Please, I'm lost. My horse can't make it through the storm. I need shelter. Jake hesitated. He'd heard that before, strangers looking for help that turned out to be thieves or worse. But something in the voice cut through his suspicion. It wasn't harsh or demanding. It was scared. He opened the door just a few inches. Rain blew in sideways, cold and stinging. A woman stood there, wrapped in a tattered coat, her hair plastered to her face. She was shivering so hard he could hear her teeth clattering. Morning came slow, painted in gray light and soft drizzle. The storm had passed, but the air still carried that heavy quiet that comes after something wild has broken loose. The land outside the ranch lay washed and still, puddles glinting in ruts, fence posts leaning tired, smoke from the chimney curling into a pale sky. Inside, the fire had burned low, but enough warmth lingered to keep the chill from biting too deep. Jake stirred first. His back ached from sleeping in the chair, his arms still draped protectively over the edge of the cradle he'd made from an old apple crate. Both babies were awake now, their little fingers clutching at the blanket, eyes bright and curious. He smiled faintly, rubbing his beard. Morning, you two. A soft rustle came from behind him, the sound of fabric shifting, a quiet sigh. He turned. Mara was sitting up near the hearth, wrapped in the same coat she'd worn when she arrived, her hair loose and tangled, her expression unreadable. For a second, she looked startled, as if waking in a stranger's home was still something she wasn't used to. Jake rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, she said, her voice still soft from sleep. I was just listening to them. They sound like the world's still turning. Jake followed her gaze to the twins. Samuel was babbling in half-formed sounds, and Clara had found her thumb again, her eyes watching the light from the window. Yeah, he said. Guess it is. Mara smiled faintly, then looked toward the small table near the stove. Do you have coffee? Used to, Jake muttered, scratching his jaw. Ran out 2 weeks back. I can make do with hot water, she said, pushing herself up. Her movements were slow but steady. Jake noticed the limp, faint but there, as she crossed the floor. You hurt? He asked. She paused, glancing down at her boot. Got thrown when my horse panicked in the storm. I'll be fine. He didn't push further. Instead, he knelt near the hearth and stoked the fire back to life. The flames licked up the kindling, throwing light across the cabin again. He set a small pot of water to heat and stepped aside. Mara moved quietly, like she was used to being careful in someone else's space. She found a tin cup, rinsed it, and waited for the steam to rise before pouring a little water. Then she sat near the cradle, her eyes softening as she looked at the children again. They're beautiful, she murmured. Jake nodded, crouching beside her. Their ma was beautiful too. That made her glance up at him. The firelight caught in her eyes, turning them amber. She's gone. 3 winters now. He swallowed, his voice rough. Fever took her before the doctor made it out from town. Mara looked down, the corner of her mouth tightening in quiet sympathy. I'm sorry. He shrugged, though the motion didn't hide the ache in his eyes. I thought I could handle it all. The ranch, the twins, the winters. But truth is, he trailed off, shaking his head. Truth is I'm just barely keeping it together. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers brushing a lock of hair from Clara's cheek. You've kept them alive. That's more than most could say. The words landed soft but solid, like something he'd needed to hear. He looked at her, really looked, and saw more than a weary traveler. She had lines of grit and pain on her face that didn't come from the road alone. Whatever she'd been through, it had carved strength into her. After a moment, he asked, where were you headed? Nowhere, really. Her eyes didn't leave the fire. I had a place once. Husband, land, a little cabin. Then one night, it all burned down. Bandits. Sheriff said they moved through half the county before they were stopped. I've been moving since. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd heard that story before, too many times. This land was cruel to those who didn't have someone watching their back. I can't go back, she said simply. There's nothing left. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the faint gurgle of the twins. Mara reached for the pot, poured more water into the tin, and handed it to him. Steam curled between them. He took it, their fingers brushing, a fleeting touch, but enough to make him glance up. She met his eyes briefly, then looked away, a small color rising to her cheeks. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded. You don't owe me that. You gave me shelter. He almost laughed. That storm would have killed you. I couldn't have just left you out there. She tilted her head, a half smile playing at her lips. You could have. Plenty would have. Jake didn't answer, just took a sip of the hot water and turned toward the window. Outside, the land stretched wide and raw under the pale sky. The mountains were dusted with snow, the fences still standing by luck alone. Mara followed his gaze. It's hard country. He grunted in agreement. Harder when you're alone. Her eyes softened again. You're not. The words hung between them, simple but heavy. He turned, meeting her gaze, and for the first time since Emily's passing, Jake felt something stir in his chest, not grief, but the faint echo of warmth. He set the tin down and went to check the babies. Samuel had fallen asleep again, his tiny hand wrapped around Clarice. Jake smiled faintly and covered them with another layer of blanket. When he straightened, Mara was standing near the window, staring out. Storm cleared, she said quietly. You'll be able to ride to town tomorrow. He nodded. Need to pick up feed, maybe work a few cattle east side. She hesitated, then said, I could help. Just for a few days. Jake blinked. You don't owe me that either. I know. Her voice was steady. But I'm not good at sitting still. And, I like the babies. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Could use another pair of hands. Mara smiled, the first real smile since she'd arrived. It changed her whole face, lighting something inside her that had been dimmed for too long.